we all had our own sort of group character development. So we all went to the athletics club to see how people ran, the physicalities of it. So the way that their hands worked, the way that their legs were placed, and their sort of angles and things like that in their body. But for me specifically as Amber, I went away, did a lot of, because of her age and things like that, the mannerisms of a 15-year-old teenager. And also I actually watched a lot of running videos, I have to admit. And that was sort of how I sort of developed the characterization of Amber. There was a lot of things. So I have cousins who are of that age. I would observe them. So, for example, I do this thing with my hands as Amber, where she's sort of gripping onto her jacket, her zip. And this is a very specific thing. But I thought because she's a very anxious character, I sort of read about how teenagers present themselves in an anxious way. And my cousin kindly told me her coping mechanisms and things like that. And as she develops like anxiety as a teenager. And so I sort of thought that's a really nice, way of portraying that for her. And I thought, okay, every time her dad comes up on stage and it's that whole, okay, the physicality's changed. She's like, her stance is a lot more frozen and she's going to fiddle with her zip. That's like her coping mechanism to calm herself down. And I thought that was a really wonderful way to portray anxiety in Amber. And of course, with her running, I think a lot of teenagers that I saw interviews of and videos of said how running made them feel, and it's very similar to how it makes Amber feel in the script. And so it's about having your chest open when you're running and all of those things, thinking about the sky and how it's higher than you. So all of those little things is what I sort of found in Amber, I'd say. Sort of going back onto the previous topic of the way that Amber's mannerisms will be with her dad. For example, it's more frozen. Her stance is very much still because she's afraid of her dad, and it's a very volatile household. It's very unpredictable. It's not a stable environment for Amber. So of course, when she runs, there's a massive juxtaposition between running and then when she's home. So for example, when she's running, it will be smiling. Her whole facial expression is completely different. It's more open and outwards. And then as soon as she hits home, it's like everything's in, and her fists are a lot more together, and like she sees her dad and she can barely look at him because she's that afraid of him. And so with her relationship with her dad, it's very much a fear-based relationship. With her mum, it's from the very beginning, it's almost non-existent, but as time goes on, they realise they're on the same side, so that sort of opens up. And then, of course, Ruby, her sister, in the play, obviously they used to be close, but then they're not anymore because the divide of the volatile household and how everyone clashed because of that toxic environment, they all sort of parted ways, and they don't realise until later on that common love that was still there is still there, basically. And so every sort of character is different in the way that their relations are on stage, I would say. Obviously with Ruby, she moves out, she gets married and does all of these things, and so there is an immediate distance between the sisters. But I would imagine that beforehand they were very close, they would be very affectionate with each other, they would have that sisterly love of being very close to each other in proximity. But now, because of their distance, you'll see on stage that the way that they are, the way that they stand is very, it's not as loving, it's not as warm, it's very distant from each other. And even in their vocabulary, the way that they talk to each other is a little bit more of an aggressive tone. And so therefore you can actually sense there is a bit of tension between the sisters and something did go down. And these arguments that happened previously is what sort of has a wedge between them. And you can also see that in their physicalities, their pitch of their voice and all of those elements. I feel like that the reason why, in my opinion, Amber doesn't engage as much affection with her friends and she sort of lets them lead the affection is because although she's open to her friends' affection, she's never had that at home, so she's not used to knowing what to do with that or leading that, or she would never really initiate a hug or anything because she's in such a volatile environment and headspace that she would just never initiate it. And so when love and affection comes her way, she doesn't know what to do with it. But she definitely wants it. She just doesn't know how to go about it. She wants the audience there on her side. They are definitely on her side. She loves speaking to the audience. She wants to let them know that this is her story and that she's proud of it. And even though there are times where it's really hard to speak to the audience about her life, she very much loves the attention of, right, this is what I'm going to say and you're going to love it. And she loves the responses of the audience. She knows that everyone has something that they can relate to in this story, and I think that she gets off on that, and she's like, right, watch this, you don't want to miss it. And she makes sure that the audience are engaged at all times because it's important for her to tell a story right. And so I'd say there's so many times in the story where she breaks the fourth wall to speak to the audience, even points at them and all of those elements, because she wants to engage them and say, look, you don't want to miss this. There is a Punjabi section where obviously the dad and Amber are speaking in a different language, and based off of depending on how diverse or inclusive the audience may be, there will be a lot of people that might not be able to understand that language. And so with moments like that, in order to tell the story correctly, Amber has to break the fourth wall in order to explain to the audience, this is what's happening right now. And so the audience aren't ever confused. They know that there's clarity throughout the whole story. So they know that when her parents and her are speaking, it's in this language and all of those things. So they're not left confused. They know exactly what's happening step by step. We developed that in rehearsal, actually. So in the script, it says in brackets in Punjabi, but the actual script itself is in English. And so me and Push, who plays Harbans, who is Amber's dad, we sort of went away, translated it ourselves. And even throughout, there's a dance sequence in this play as well. And most of the time, me and Push actually improvise that a lot. And there will be similar things that happen in there where we say the same things just because we're used to that in those characters and for the story to drive itself. But other than that, we very much improvise that, and it's a really lovely thing to do because both Push and I are Punjabi, and to have that element, to be able to put our own stance on it, is a really lovely thing. At the beginning, she's very much sitting on her emotions. She doesn't, even though she's feeling anxious, she's feeling all of those volatile emotions, she's very much sitting at the heart of it. And it's almost like putting a lid on something. Like as soon as you open that jar, things will flood away. And she's a teenager who's not prepared to deal with those emotions because she's not been taught how to communicate. She's not been taught how to deal with those in a healthy manner. And so when she's talking to the audience about her emotions, about her story, she's very much sitting on that and almost trying to hide how she truly feels. And so when there's things like the flashback moment in the play, it's something that she's not used to. And it's almost like I don't want to say PTSD moment, but in some way there's something that triggers it. And so in the end, as much as she's trying to put a lid on it, it's all catching up to her. And I think throughout the play, when her and her mum are on each other's side, she then realises, okay, it's safe to accept these emotions. And it's a huge deal for Amber because she sat on these emotions for such a long time of her life. And so now she's like, okay, this is acceptable. I'm okay to feel these things and I'm okay to show it. I think that's when it changes for her, because as soon as she lets those emotions out, she can breathe again. And suddenly there's a motivation. And that feeling of being able to breathe in a volatile situation is such a liberating feeling for her that she then has a purpose on wanting to get out of that. And so that's where the revolution moment happens, and she realizes that there is so much happening so much happening around her that's bigger than her, basically. And she knows that there's more to life than just this. And so that's what motivates her. And she realizes if she wants to be anything, she has to decide that. No amount of a volatile situation, like it doesn't matter what your situation is, you are the only person that can change that. And I think she realizes that towards the end of the play, of what kind of person that she wants to be, and she'll fight for that, I'd say. The running in this play is very specific. So, for example, there's hill training in school. So the way that everyone's going to be running, there are going to be a couple of students who aren't really good runners, so they'll show that in the way that they move. They're going to be a little bit slower than Amber. There's going to be students who are very competitive with her, so they'll show that in their facial expression, in the way that their hands move is a lot faster and their chest is a lot more open. And so hill training is one of those where they do those things together. But then there's the running at the very, very beginning where it's almost like a competition. And so in those elements, running is portrayed very differently. So with hill training, they're all together. They'll do things simultaneously. All the characters will, for example, there's the running tall sequence. We'll all put our hands up, so it shows that we're all in unison. And then when it's a competition, you'll see some are faster than the other. And so I'd say the elements of running in the play is portrayed differently depending on which story we're trying to tell with that, if that makes sense. So the way that the stage is, there's a ramp. So we use the ramp quite a lot, and it's a great representation to show how when you're running, you feel like you're flying almost. And so there's that big momentum and then there's a drop, and it works perfectly for hill training. So when there's hill training, you obviously go up the hill and then you come back down. And I think that's a great way of portraying what kind of training they're doing in that moment. And it's very specific. And so it's really good to try and find that momentum. And so the audience know exactly what training it is, what kind of running it is, where they are in that moment as well. Amber's basically telling the audience how running makes her feel, and the way that it's, you know, she's the fastest person there. And so when she goes past that finishing line, it's like a firework. It's like she's up in the air. And so as soon as she gets to that firework, that feeling of elation, it's about going up that ramp and feeling like she's up in the sky. And so obviously I run up the ramp and everyone's sort of catching me, but the reason for that is that representation of her feeling like she's in air and she's feeling light, and all of those beautiful light flying moments of her emotions.